maybe this is too strict of a requirement, but that's where the baseline came from, was looking at their, and I took the least restrictive of the different communities. And so, so that's where it comes down with where the bicycle parking figures came from. And then I didn't get a picture of an electric charging station. I was going to do that, and I did not. I apologize, but they do have electric vehicle charging stations that kind of look like the orange bicycle repair station a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's where that all came from. Couple of things that have happened in the last couple of days in working with developer. Oh, and I also put the mailbox requirement in here. And I also clarified that landscaping shall comply with landscaping requirements in commercial districts and multifamily design standards. And so, because I had someone say to me, well, it just says that we have to comply with the commercial landscaping, so that's what we'll do. And I thought, no, that's got to be clarified. So anyway, that's the point of that. There's quite a bit of other information that you received in today's copy. And Kathleen, I'm going to ask for a couple of minutes after I quickly say that, and you can discuss it while I scoot and make us a couple of copies of today's copy that I sent out. But there has been some question of what people should submit and when they should submit it in their application process. And so I added quite a bit about submitting application and what really needed to come with it. And I think one of the things that's really, really important is that we make sure that we're looking at what the pictures and what the text are saying is in harmony. And sometimes we'll have developers that will just give us color elevations. Sometimes we have developers that just give us architectural the elevations or color renderings. And then sometimes we'll have applicants that want to just give us the architectural elevations, and we really need them both to make sure it's a complete package. So I wanted to, that was my intent, was to make it clear that we really do need everything we're asking for in order to satisfy the requirements of the ordinance.
Scarlett, but this pretty much is what the staff needs in order that they can bring the stuff to us, which is the full. So it's your ball game really is what is needed.
Right, but I still want you to see it and understand why, because the staff does its very best, but when you get those packages, you're the folks that approve it. And so, thanks, Ryan. Yeah.
Well, part of the genesis of Scarlett putting all this information in here is that sometimes we're submitted drawings, but the text does not match. It doesn't match the drawings.
And actually, Kathleen, I have to apologize. I skipped and went into the next ordinance, so we'll save that discussion for the next one. But anyway, on the other thing that we added that's new on this 511 is the infrastructure minimum improvements. And we have also had some developers that, and I know why they're doing it, and I feel for them, but the way they're doing financing now, the way the banks are doing some of the financing, sometimes it's difficult for developers that are doing multifamily buildings and commercial buildings to get the financing for the minimum financing for the infrastructure improvements prior to getting the financing for the structures. The banks want to have a certain guarantee about the structure and how many units and all of that type of thing. So I totally get that, but the other thing that I looked at is we have minimum infrastructure improvements in our subdivision ordinance. But if somebody is not subdividing, if they're just coming in, like Spring Creek Apartments, they are coming in with a development plan for mixed use, but they are not subdividing. They're retaining ownership of everything. They may, at some point, break off the lot that they're showing with retail, but it's not it's not shown in their concept plan that that's their intent. And so I felt like we probably needed to include minimum improvements for large scale, well, for any scale development in mixed use that is going to come in and not have it tied specifically to the subdivision ordinance. So that's why on page 2 of 6, beginning with line 16, the infrastructure improvements are in there. And some of the wording comes from our existing city code, and some of the wording comes from state code. I also talked with Aaron Walker. He called me this morning. He didn't have time to get me an email, but he called me, said that he had looked at it. He said he felt like where we refer to the fire code as part of the improvements that are essential, if you'll see that on line 20, it says Providence City considers the following public and or private infrastructure minimum improvements essential or required to meet the building code, fire code, flood or storm water management provisions, street and access requirements. That's state code says that if we're going to require bonding in place, then we can only require it on infrastructure that is essential to meet the building code, fire code, flood or stormwater management provisions. That's why it's written like that. That's utilizing the state code. And then in our code already in the subdivision talks about all grading of roads, the stormwater improvements, and the egress and ingress to provide acceptable and safe travel to and from each proposed structure. And that's one of the things that one of the developers was questioning, is if they had to actually have access in place, well, access into the development, but access into where the structures would be prior to having anything that was combustible. And I explained to them, well, if somebody gets hurt during the construction process and somebody's got to get in there with an emergency vehicle, they have to have some type of a surface that they can get the vehicle in there to save the person's life, if that's what it takes. And so that's kind of where this is all coming from, is from actual questions that I've received in just the last little bit. And then,
so Scarlett, so this is added into the mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
What about other developments?
In subdivisions, it's added. I added the same thing into
That's required of subdivision.
the multifamily. And then in a subdivision, if they're subdividing, whether it's mixed use, multifamily, single family, if they're subdividing, the infrastructure is in the subdivision ordinance. So
this language is consistent with what we're requiring of everyone across the board.
yes, well, we have to update a little bit of the language, and I'm going to show you where it's different here in just a minute. And then it talks about the inspections, the minimum improvement inspection. And once that's done, then we can issue building permits. Now this is where it varies from our existing ordinance. The state code, and this is right out of state code pretty much, an improvement completion assurance and improvement warranty. Those are two different things. Before an applicant conducts any development activity or records a plat, the applicant shall complete any required landscaping or infrastructure improvements, or post an improvement completion assurance for any required landscaping or infrastructure improvements. This does not include infrastructure that is required to be private. 100% of the incomplete or unaccepted landscaping or infrastructure. So they can, if they want to go forward, they can post a bond, or we have to give them the opportunity to complete that. That's right out of state code. Upon acceptance of the landscaping and infrastructure, and the other thing that's out of state code is 100%. And traditionally, we've been allowed to charge or to require a bond of 110%, but state code says 100% now.
So we're presuming that they will have done the infrastructure work for pipes and stuff like that if they're going to put landscaping in before they start building.
We're presuming that they're going to, if they're not going to put it in, then we're presuming they're going to bond for it.
Okay.
The state code does allow them to complete any of, now it has to be off of approved construction drawings. It can't just be willy-nilly out there. They went and did something before everything was approved. So they have to get their approvals, but if they want to put their improvements in before they place the bond, we have to allow them that opportunity to do that. So, but if they don't put the improvements in and they just want to file their plat and sell their lots and get started, then we can require the bond.
Okay.
So that's the way that's written. And then once those improvements are accepted, and this one, it causes me heartburn because it's hard for us to collect it after they can build, because that 10% warranty is kind of a minimal thing, but we do want a 10% surety bond, letter of credit, or similar security in the amount of 10% of the lesser of the municipal engineer's original estimate cost of completion or the applicant's reasonable proven cost. And that came right out of state code as well. That's what we have to base it off of.
Okay.
So that's the little bit of difference that our current code in the subdivision will have to, as we start going through getting all of the state code amendments in place, our current code will have to reflect some of that in the subdivision part. And that pretty much highlights the newest changes for the mixed use.
That's a question. Sorry. Better get up here. We have in here charging for electric vehicles. It just says a charge. It's only mentioned that. How are we going to make this charge?
No, they have to provide a charging station.
Right. And how are they going to pay for it? How is it going to be metered so they pay for it? That's
going to be part of the homeowners association to take care of that.
So they have a lot of these charging stations. There's quite a few different kind of charging stations. There's one over on Federal Avenue, Federal Avenue, over by Cafe Ibis and that. There is a charging station over there.
Next to the Tabernacle.
Yes. And you can go and see it. It has, it kind of looks like a gas pump that has a plug. And you can pay for it. You can pay there.
You can put in a charge card.
Well, yeah, basically. I mean, there's lots of different ways, but you can do that, yeah. So there's ways to charge, and then you pay for it. It's not necessarily a direct expense to the group. The idea is a mixed-use development is something more modern, more bikes, electric vehicles. I mean, those are the kind of things that come in that. And if we don't have something different, we will get just a lot of people together. I think it is something a bit different.
Right.
But anyway, they have these all over the state. This particular one, so it's fairly a fairly common one, and it doesn't necessarily cost the developer would have to put in the station, but it could actually be a revenue source depending on what they charge. Some it's free. The hospital down here has one here in Providence, our clinic. It has one right in front of it.
It's just a cost of doing business for some places.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like a gas station, you go in and, put your card in, and then the meters gives you a slip out and says you took this many kilowatts and this is what you paid for.
And that's certainly an option. But the HOA may choose to.
They may choose to do it differently. So
I don't think they've done it yet, but there is talk in the building code community to start requiring single-family homes be wired for electric charging stations. That's not a requirement at this point, but they are talking
Probably coming
down that path. So there's no mention here of that if they're providing garages, there's no mention that they have to wire the garages or anything, but for the general populace parking within their development, we did feel like it was prudent to start being forward-thinking and having developers provide charging stations and bicycle racks and things like that.
That's that'd be a problem if they had 10 houses all in a row and were not upgraded. All of a sudden, we'd have a blackout.
Well, you can't plug in unless you've got the right plug.
Yeah.
No, like you can still.
Is it 220? Is that what it is?
yeah, it can go on 120 or 240, and it is. Yeah, it can take up to 50 amps. That's what they would charge off of, is a max of 50 amps right now.
It's enough to give you a shock.
It was because raise a little hair.
Start your heart.
I got shocked by one of our electric fences the other day. I stepped over it and touched it, and I got zapped.
Oh, yes.
I think you've done an excellent job, Scarlett.
Yes, thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
But back to your question, that's actually something that I think is a really great discussion, and how you would feel comfortable handling the percentage, whether it's based on square footage of buildings, square footage of the building plus its required parking, or the overall square footage of the lot. How do you feel like is a good workable way when we're looking at percentage of uses? What's a good workable way for you to be able to justify what they're putting in there? Does it meet the 50% rule or 75% or whatever rule you end up putting in there? So,
Well, a commercial building is going to take a lot more space. It's going to be a lot more square footage than one unit, right? So it would take up a lot of the percentage.
but if your overall apartments, if you had 100 units, then they would probably take up more space than your one commercial
building.
Yeah, depending. And is there, if we want to incentivize vertical mixed use, do you want to figure how you do the percentages? Do you want to use the same standard for horizontal mixed use and vertical mixed use, or do you want a standard for vertical and a standard for horizontal? Those are just questions that actually Ryan and I have kind of struggled with those as we've looked at the mixed use developments that we've looked at that have actually applied for and come in, to try and figure out the best way to really look at what percentage what is using. With the two that we have, we told them that they needed to look at what their proposed pad for the commercial and what they thought the parking. They had to give us their best guess of what that intent would be, and then compare that to the multifamily units and the parking for that, and work it out and work those percentages that way. But we're certainly open, because I do think it needs to be clarified, but it has to be something that's workable.
Couldn't you do it with the same standard with horizontal and vertical if you basically did it on the square footage of the finished structures exclusive of the parking area?
We could do it that way.
That would cover commercial too, wouldn't it? 4,000 feet is 4,000 feet.
Do we want to do linear, well, square footage of the property as opposed to trying to tie it to a building?
I'm gonna let you guys have that whole discussion back and forth. I just want to listen and learn at this point.
That's less complicated.
Well, the nature of an ordinance is if you didn't get it right first, you can
Let's try again.
You're gonna clock out before we even get started.
Well,
You can all erase and rewrite.
Well, we have a couple of mixed use developments going on right now. And obviously, the rules that they came in under are going to be different than these.
oh yeah.
Yes, we're using those as our learning experience.
Two of the learning experiences. We might have a couple more. Again, it becomes very complicated as you're comparing buildings. And I'm just wondering about land surface being the percentage as opposed to the building percentage. Does that make sense?
Well, it's one approach. My thought on it was if you went on the square footage of the actual units, it gives the developer and the architect the opportunity to decide what they want to make the proportion, and then they have to go back and make sure that the parking is there for that.
So,
The other thing to add to that is if it is footprint and there's multiple uses on top of each other, then that complicates it. So if it's just square footage based on
The land.
on the land, it could be multiple on top of each other.
Right.
Like, but if you're talking just finished square footage of the use, right? So if it's residential, it's 4,000 on top of another 4,000 commercial, then they're counted differently, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you put commercial on the bottom and residential on the top, then you can meet that and then do whatever parking is necessary for that. I don't have a vested interest in it. Intuitively, I like my way better. It's not that I'm trying to reject yours, but it just seems like it's countable that way. But I'll take your recommendation on it, Scarlett.
well, I actually kind of like the square footage per use versus the overall land amount, because for some of the same reasons, you still have to figure out if that use, let's say you've got a vertical, or a horizontal, either way, you still have to figure out if those footprints equal the 20% of the total value of the land, the total percentage of the land. So you're still going to be doing that kind of math.
Right.
So, the staff can make it work however you would like, however you're comfortable making it work, but, and we have to defend it, but in the long run, when it comes down to it, and you as the proving body, you have to feel comfortable with what the people are going to come and challenge you on. If they want to have something different, you have to feel comfortable with why we've chosen to do it the way we're doing it.
Whatever we do in this, about 6 months from now, this is all bounced back and we'll have to make revisions no matter what.
But that's the great part, is that we can. Nobody has the right answer. And even as we went to other cities and looked at what other cities were doing, it was difficult to say, how does that apply to us here in Providence, and look at what really makes the most sense. We want to make it flexible enough so that it's not so restrictive that developers and landowners can't use their property. But yet, on the other hand, Providence needs to make sure that we're using the land wisely. And we're providing the kinds of things that our citizens need. So how do we do that? I guess that's the question that I have in my mind. Brian, you're kind of quiet down there.
I like the way the discussion's going.
Don't have anything to add?
No, I'm learning a lot. And I do like the way it's going, because there's 2 points, 2 sides to this. And I think we just need to pick one, that
So
everybody's comfortable with, staff and commission.
if we took it the way it's written, so we've crossed out 20%, 75%, and said no one use can be more than 50%. So the mixed use developments that we have now, do they meet this?
No, because they didn't have to meet this. So they,
But I'm just asking, did they end up doing something that was close to this?
no, they went with the
The higher end?
the 80% residential and the 20% retail. And Danny, he has, I think his is 60% residential, 20% retail, and 20% non-retail, but commercial. Is the way he split his up.
Are doctor's offices considered commercial?
No, they would be considered, well, yes, commercial, sorry.
They're not retail, but they're commercial.
Well, this one has retail, commercial, office, and residential, so it gives 4 options. Could be commercial or office,
Right.
depending on how you define.
And that was based on our discussions that we felt like people were getting so hung up on the retail component that they weren't really looking to see the bigger picture. So we looked at broadening it to say we kind of walked away a little bit from saying you must have retail. We walked away from saying you must have retail to saying you're going to have a residential component and you're going to have a commercial retail components somehow within that 50-50 mix is kind of what we're looking at. That way they don't have to have a 50, do like Danny and have a 60-20-20. They can figure out how to do 50% of the office retail part all on their own, whatever they feel like generates the best use for their development. I think that's the key though, is having someone looking at a mixed use development with the idea of figuring out the best types of commercial retail that will enhance their development and their residential component, rather than I want a residential component. What's the easiest thing I can put in here?
By the way, I can throw in a couple of.
Yeah.
So if I am looking at this and I'm reading it correctly, we're calling commercial/retail one option and housing another option. So there are 2 options, but the commercial/retail isn't called out separately.
Right.
I don't read it that way.
Okay.
I'm of the uses, retail, commercial, office, and residential. So you have 4 uses.
4 different.
And office would be akin to a commercial, but it would be separate from a commercial.
So then they couldn't lump that in.
You can have 50% office, or 50% residential, or 50% commercial, or 50% retail. The way that's written in my reading, but
And could I have 25 and 25 and then 50?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was a goal, was the 25 and 25 and then 50. What we didn't want was to have them think they had to have a percentage of retail, a percentage of commercial, a percentage of office, and a percentage of residential, because
Makes it too
if you
restrictive.
tried to do all of that, that'd make you have to have 200%, because
Then you got,
you can't have your 50-50.
you got blinders on then.
Right, so if the wording's not clear, because we want them to interpret it the way you did, that out of those uses,
They can pick any of them,
And it just says that, nothing,
but they can't do more than 50% of any of them.
nothing more than.
Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay.
And any mixture you want.
No one use can be more than 50%.
Which means it doesn't have to have residential at all.
That's right.
Or it also doesn't have to have retail. Right?
So is the commission good with that?
It can be 25, 25, 25, and 25 if somebody wants to do it that way.
But I would ask you if 50% is what the commission would like. I would just look at various options and possibilities. Do you like what Danny had? Not to pick on Danny because it's not here, but that 60%, it was a bit more, but did have several retail components. I just trying to flesh out to make sure that 50%, and I'm gonna have no recommendation, it's just trying to flesh out the discussion of, is the 50%, do you want this to be more of something than another? Or is this something that says, okay, I can take, let's use the one on the south end that is talked about or is in the general plan. It has mixed use. It was kind of looked at, from what I hear, kind of as a blending from a residential to the commercial zone.
Are you talking about the one on Garden Drive?
Yes, the 10 acres. So with this change, and that's why I ask, with this change, it could be no residential.
That's right.
Is that, I'm
Is
not
that what
like,
we want?
that's what I'm proposing back and just saying, flesh out a little bit just to make sure that you've waited, maybe looking at the area, is that what you'd want down there? Does a mixed use have to have, are you using it as a buffer and should it have to have some residential component? Or if you had one of these that you've approved to do over, would you have done it different? Would you have a different percentage? Anyway, just kind of fleshing out the discussion. I have no recommendation.
So, no matter what we do, if we put too much business up against the house residential this way, we're gonna have this room full of people complaining. So that may be a lot of where our decision comes from, is what the populace wants.
What do the citizens want?
What the citizens want, what does fit. That's gonna be a con.
Do we want a buffer?
I don't know.
Or do we want residential, line, and commercial? Because that's what this would allow.
You see, with me, residential and commercial immediate back to back doesn't bother me because I grew up with my home with a Foster's Trees and a McDonald's right behind the house. I mean, we could go through our fence and go to them. So I grew up that way, and it did not affect us residential-wise. See, so with me, it doesn't bother me, but it's going to be a lot of people it is going to bother.
Yes, we know that already.
Yes.
We know that already.
So we're
From
going
them.
to have to make our decisions when they come, but I don't think we should require a residential buffer.
so let me make one other point. We already have a zone that they can do retail, commercial, and office in. That's the commercial general district. So if somebody's coming and they really don't want to have a residential component, we already have a zone that they can do that in. Now they may have to ask for a rezone. They may say, this is planned for mixed use and I don't want to mess with the residential part. I'd like it rezoned to commercial general. But that shouldn't be a problem.
So they
If you
don't already
don't
do
care
that.
about the, yeah.
Yeah.
So in my mind, that's the point of mixed, is to have that little bit of residential in there, because we already have a zone that you can do commercial, a retail, commercial, and office in. But that's just my mind. You guys can certainly.
And another toss up into that one is this a replacement for commercial general? And if it's mixed use and we're going to allow commercial general and retail and office all in the same one, is that what you're intending? Because she's right. We have one that can do the retail, commercial, and office. Doesn't have residential in that piece, but is that what you're looking at?
Not having been here when mixed use was developed and added to our codes, I wonder if the original thinking was that it would be a walkable community that had everything in it. And so mixed use was a way to be able to provide a walkable community with everything in close proximity, but it did need to obviously include the residential piece so that it was all mixed in there.
So the original one, the intent was residential and retail. And if you wanted to throw some office in there and make that work, you could, but that was the intent, and that's because that's where sales tax dollars come from. Population gives us a bump in our sales tax dollars because of the population component and the way the state figures sales tax. Rooftops encourage businesses to come, so the residential gives you rooftops and gives you the bump in population for the sales tax component, and then the retail, of course, gives you the sales tax component. So the original thinking, like 15 years ago, that's what they were going after. I think now, with the way things have changed as far as online shopping and all kinds of different things, maybe there is some difference in the direction which you should take. So that's what you folks are here to decide.
May I give an example? My son just bought a townhome in Holiday. Just right next to the townhome, the doctor's offices, a full market, all sorts of restaurants, and other commercial, all within walking distance. But you go 2 blocks and it's full residential. Just bango. There's the parking lot for all these people, and then it's full residential. So
Do they like that?
my son likes it. He likes it real well because he says I can walk to everything, did everything done on one.
But your son's in one of the townhomes, right? Is that what you
Right,
said?
he's in a townhome. Which actually, when he's in his top of his townhome, he's down looking on much of this stuff. And he enjoys it, and from what I can determine, there was not a whole lot of complaints there in Holiday about it when it was put in. So I think what we do is, if we feel comfortable with what we have here, go with it and then see what happens.
We honestly don't have a lot of property that would even fall into that.
That's right.
Should there be a residential component to the point where it should say,
It's a fixed
That we-
amount.
yes, but where would the statute is actually named residential mixed use? So that it is intended for residential and others, and that the minimum 50% or the maximum 50% be set to the retail, or set to the residential.
And then the rest of these 4 things, or these other things that are mentioned, can take on whatever percentage
In the other 50.
in the other 50.
Has that been the major interest of the developers, has been the residential component? I mean, that one that was so far down there that's not ready yet, I mean, they had no idea what they were gonna do except residential. They had no plans or Any idea on the rest of it?
Did Millville, is that Millville or Nibley that has that parcel in it?
It's no,
The
no,
10,
Millville.
it's Millville.
It's nobody, it's still unincorporated.
Oh, it's still county,
still counted.
It adjoins Millville.
Millville.
But it-
And their plans for that on their master plan is commercial,
No, they don't have that designated how they,
so they haven't done anything with that designation.
I'll have to look and make sure, but I don't think they have that designated as how they would
Okay.
zone that in the future.
The parcel over here on the other side of the theaters, that's 60% housing,
No, that came in 80%.
80%.
Is that one completed
No.
through the commission?
Now, just
It's still up in the air.
to be clear on what Millville's done, they do have the USU property is actually zoned. When you pull the zoning, the city zoning layer up on the county parcel zoning viewer, it shows the USU property is actually zoned as commercial. But if you look at their,
Commercial highway, because it's right.
I don't know what they call it.
Okay.
It's commercial something. I don't know what. I didn't go into what all they allow there.
And that 10 acre piece abuts that on the east.
Right.
Correct.
Right. And all I'm saying is the last time I looked at their future rezone map, what they anticipate for future annexations and rezone, they didn't call out anything specific on that 10 acres. But to the west of it, the USU property, that is zoned commercial.
Okay. What do you think, Joe? Do you have any thoughts about?
Well, what I'm hearing is that the developers are gonna want to have the 50% residential because that's what the market is driving right now. And, but there's nothing in the ordinance that says that. And if they throw out the residential and do the other mixed use, they're just doing the same thing in the mixed use district that they could have done if it
Commercial
was
general.
zoned commercial general. So if I'm hearing it correctly, you know, I don't know.
I would like to propose that we go with the 50% residential to keep it in the spirit of what was intended when this mixed use was put together. And then they can do whatever percentage they want with the commercial, the retail, the office, whatever, so they can mix it up.
Well, like I said, the spirit of what was going on 15 years ago is different than
Than
what
today's
you have
market.
today.
Right.
But I was just clarifying where the original, what their thought process was. So,
Nobody knows what retail means anymore, is the problem. Just because there are so many other options rather than walking with your feet into a store. And so people are choosing to buy and have a greater variety of things to purchase when they go online. Mayor?
In North Logan, there's this roadway called Wolfpack Way, also 200 east, parallels the highway. North Logan has experimented with what this original ordinance language was intended to do, and that was, if you go to the cities back east where there's a storefront downstairs and then upstairs there's residential living. There's some on the west side you might want to take a look at, see what they've done with that, but
The west side.
the west
Of
side of
Wolfpack Way.
Wolfpack Way. I think it's 1800 north. You go past the Sports Academy, there's a roundabout,
Yeah.
just past
Right.
there, and then there's another roundabout. So it's in between there.
And then
So
there's the high school. So there's not a lot between the second roundabout and the high school right now.
Right. So, but that west side has been developed with this
Right.
residential, commercial, retail concept, so
What has North Logan said about it?
I don't know, I can ask the mayor.
But it was
It seems to have been well received and
That's up by the
accepted,
university.
so anyway,
They indicated that the problem they had in selling the units was the commercial. The banks didn't know how to finance the
Right.
commercial, but they seem to have,
Right.
they said they solved that problem.
right.
The work-live units is what you're talking
They
about.
solved the problem with the financing
Right.
arrangements.
You know, I've lived in cities where the commercial on the bottom, residential's on top,
Yeah.
and it just didn't happen that way, you know. It was, I mean, it came about after several years. It's been a successful model
Yeah.
for a number of cities, particularly as population. Yeah, what?
Need your mic.
Maybe
Our
I'm
person
wrong.
doing the minutes just can't hear you, is the problem.
Yeah. I just,
but
That's-
what,
But that evolved without someone saying, this is what you must do. Is that what you're saying?
no, I'm just saying that as land has gotten more valuable. I mean, it was in the 40s and the 50s that we went to the suburbs and did that. But as land gets less and less, it just adds an additional option.
As you drive down Main Street, there are stores on the bottom, and there was some residential on top. Ogden's downtown is the same.
Mhm.
You know, some of them are offices, some of them are living quarters.
It was the same in Long Beach, California.
Yeah.
I had an uncle that had a fantastic Mexican restaurant, and
He
they
lived
lived
above
over
it.
the restaurant.
So there's precedent for it. It's just that we got away from it when we did the suburban sprawl thing. And now as we try to get back into using our land more wisely, it's difficult for people to think outside the box and do what we were doing before because it's just hard to change. Okay, so,
I suggest we go with what we have here.
and let somebody do what they could do in commercial highway or commercial general
Yeah. And then,
and not require residential at all.
right,
Okay,
let's go like that, and let's see what we get. We'll get some reaction, and then we'll know where we want to go from there.
so what you're doing is, you're proposing that we put that out to everybody and say, this is what we're proposing for this, and take comments?
It is probably getting close to the time that we would want to schedule a public hearing.
We'd have to have a public hearing
It's a
no
land
matter
use,
what.
yeah, right, it's a land use ordinance, so we will need to have a public hearing. And you know, it can
So that would
certainly
be
be
a good
changed
way to do
after
it.
the public hearing,
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Based on what you said about the thought 15 years ago, I like the idea of titling it residential mixed use district. And I like the idea of putting in that a minimum of it has to be at least residential. So it is a true mixed use.
What
But
percentage? 25?
you know, that's where the market seems to drive it.
25 is not very much when you're talking about. So that 75% they can do commercial, but and so then do the residential units become dwarfed by all the rest? Of course, a developer is going to want to sell their stuff. So they're going to want to make it so that it's pleasing to whoever's going to buy a unit or live in a unit. Do we let the market drive it? Put a minimum percentage and then let the market drive what they do?
And right now, the market's going to drive it to the maximum of 50% for residential.
That's true.
And if they do a vertical, I'm not so sure that I'm not comfortable with saying 60% residential, because most of the commercial stuff's going to be on the bottom. If they're
Could be on the bottom.
willing to go, yeah, it could be, but it's usually the model that's that people do.
Any motion?
I like the idea of a residential.
Requiring a
Require
residential
a
component.
50% or less residential. 50% less?
A maximum, a maximum
No
of
more than
50.
50% residential.
Okay.
There's a reason for the mixed use,
Right.
and let's do it, but let's don't let it go to get out of control. We should be thinking 50 years down the road, not today's market, because we know what today's market's worth. It's just gonna turn around in a few years.
Do we need a motion in order to get this for public hearing?
No, yeah, you can just, this is a study item, so
Okay,
if you feel comfortable, I can make a couple of those changes and we can we can get it scheduled for a public hearing.
I would like to see
I'm-
residential in there.
Yes,
We don't need a vote.
I move that we go to the public hearing.
Okay. Okay, with the addition of the, 3 of us want the residential in there. Okay, let's put the residential in there. Not to exceed 50%.
All right,
I have an extra question for you, Chair, just as a thought. If it is a horizontal mixed use,
Horizontal
vertical
or
mixed
vertical?
use, sorry,
Yeah.
vertical mixed use, thank you.
This
Appreciate
is not horizontal.
Vertical mixed use.
You got it.
So if it did that and they put green space on the top, would that make a difference to you? I'm just posing it as a, if we're into this thing,
Are you really looking for trouble, or?
no, I'm
Okay, I
not.
just want to make sure.
But it,
You were getting on the edge.
I'm just
But it could be.
curious.
No, yeah, but to me, that would be an amenity that somebody would add to a luxury unit, a very nice amenity. I think it'd be great, but it's just something I think the market would dictate rather than we
It's
have
a
to worry
fair-
about.
well, we're
Fair
requiring some
answer, I
green
would just-
space.
Wait a minute, look at the-
You don't want to talk to me, you want to talk to me?
Oh, I want to talk to you guys.
Oh,
That's, Brian's great at keeping himself neutral, or he thinks he is. So, anyway, I think it's a great amenity, but I don't think it ought to be considered as part of the ordinance.
because we are requiring a certain amount of green space.
Yeah.
So can that count toward green space, is what you're asking?
Just as we're inside of mixed use, something
We
we
may as well
kind
consider everything.
of talked about just out of curiosity. It's not trying to get a requirement or anything. It just was tossing out if that's something you want added or not. So anyway, just asking the question if that made a difference. And it sounds like it doesn't. It's just an amenity, which is well,
It's worth thinking about.
I can tell you, if I were representing the developer and he was wanting to go with the cost on top of that, build into the structure, that it would hold that, I would crush you and say it meets the green space. And I don't have a problem with that personally.
I do, because of who is going to enjoy that space? Is that space intended
Fair comment.
for
all the people
for
in
the
there.
tenants that live there? Even if they say it's public, it's still trying to get through the buildings. It's a private type situation, so. But that green area is around the buildings, that's more for us as a public.
Add the word public green space then to it.
Okay.
That solves it.
So you put that in.
one thing we haven't really done in the mixed use is put a lot of green space type requirements and things in there, because the commercial site plan requires certain types of landscaping and parking. And then, as you'll see when we start in on the multifamily, it requires certain landscaping. So we haven't really talked about utilizing percentages a lot in the mixed use, because the thought was we would fall back on those 2 ordinances. But if it seems more prudent to incorporate what we want to out of those 2 ordinances and just have the mixed use be more of a standalone, then that will take some more work, which is fine to do. I just need to know the direction, so then we wouldn't go to a public hearing in 2 weeks, because, or whenever your next meeting is.
Well, as we looked at the mixed use over here, they had those amenities, the playgrounds and the pickleball courts and the things that would be amenities to the residents,
Mhm.
but it's not required. So that could easily go away and become commercial space. Like if they had McDonald's that said, we want to go in there, they'd say, okay, no more playground, no more pickleball courts, it's going to be a McDonald's. But what we wanted to get away from, or what my thought was, we don't want to have these mixed-use developments be a big parking lot full of paving. And so that's why we gave them options for parking. They're not requirements, but they're options.
I just need some direction. I don't mind working the landscaping component into the mixed use rather than falling back on those other two codes. That just wouldn't be quite ready and quick enough. It'll, for the next meeting to be public hearing, because you would want to look at that first before you took it to the public to weigh in on what I put in there for you to start with. So that's totally up to you, whichever direction you'd like to go.
So the green space that is required, if we looked at the Macy's shopping center, that's pretty much what we're requiring.
Macy's shopping center doesn't
Meet that?
meet what we require now,
Okay.
because it didn't have the green space going around the building. Like now
Yeah,
we require
that's right.
green space right up around the buildings. So some of the newer sites in the Macy's shopping center meet
that.
the green space requirement, but the Macy's portion itself, the strip mall portion with Macy's and the nail
The inline
thing
shops.
and the dollar, that does not meet those. So there would be a little bit more landscaping around those buildings in today's world under today's ordinance. Not a lot, but a little bit more. And the parking would have to be done a little bit differently than Macy's parking. The parking separates it a little bit. You can't have a continuous string of, I can't remember, 100 spaces or something like that, which I think Macy's was allowed to do because it made sense for that grocery store, but so.
Okay. So, do we want to add more green space requirements? Keep in mind that we have very little land that this would even apply to.
And you're saying the design standards is got the green space, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So we might as well go to that one. And if you wanted it back in this, then that could be a different discussion. Anyway.
So the development in mixed use is reliant on this other ordinance.
It's relying on two other ordinances for the landscaping and parking requirements, yes.
And we've got those in here to talk about, right?
Yeah. Well, not both of them, not the commercial site plan ordinance. We just have the residential, the multifamily, the design standards for single family attached and multifamily uses. So.
Okay.
So you want to put the idea of the public hearing on hold just for a minute while we go through this other ordinance and then decide?
Yes, let's do that. Put it off.
Just for a minute.
Okay. Mañana. Okay.
I'm just trying to mind the chairman and be close to the mic if I saw.
Well, I'm just thinking of Jesse because he's doing the minutes.
Just whatever it takes to make me sound intelligent or more intelligent, I would appreciate it.
Okay, so we'll put that on hold for a minute, and then we're going to talk about the code amendments. This is another discussion item. Design standards for attached and multifamily residential developments.
By any chance, have any copies for that? This
I'll
part?
share.
Okay.
So in this
I read
one,
that, believe it or not. But
One of the
I
things-
can print another copy if anybody else wants one.
That might be a good idea.
Brian's got his up on the computer and so does Joe.
In this particular, there are some reasons for behind some of these changes. And it's not just in the multifamily, but oftentimes we have a step process. We have, if you're doing a subdivision, we have a concept, we have a preliminary plat, and we have a final plat with construction drawings. A lot of times applicants will think, well, I already gave you that information with the concept plan. Why do I need to give it with the preliminary plat and the final plat again? You've already got it for me once. Part of the problem with that is because as those things move, they make changes. And it's hard to know from a staff standpoint, and I will say this is so that staff can stay clear. It's also hard to know from a developer standpoint if that concept plan that showed the landscaping is truly the final concept, the final plan that shows the landscaping, or were there changes that were made throughout there and we didn't see it. And so we are going to more of a digital age, so we're not trying to cut down a lot of trees and things. So as staff, it's important that they label their applications and their plans properly. So that's the reasoning for saying all concepts. If you look on page 1 of 11, line 45, all concept plans shall be clearly labeled or clearly marked as a conceptual plan. And then that step repeats itself. In the development standards, whether it is a subdivision or just a development coming in that's going to be completely owned and then their rental units, they've got all three processes to go through. Because a developer doesn't want to come in with a full set of engineered drawings at the conceptual point, because we may look at that and say, oh, that doesn't meet our code, that's not going to work. So we still want to have the 3 steps, whether it's a subdivision or not. We want to have the 3 steps so that we can get what we need. We just want to make sure that everything is clearly marked. And so that as we move from step to step, we're not confused about which rendering goes with which step. Is this the rendering that we're supposed to be moving all the way through the process, or did this rendering change during the preliminary plat discussion, that type of thing. That's the reason for the request for the...
If they're saying that they feel like they've already submitted that, is it just a matter of them bringing in another copy? If it's not changed, it's just bring another copy in and you stamp it or they stamp it as not conceptual but preliminary.
It's just a matter of them somehow identifying that same piece of paper or that same digital thing as a preliminary plat. But it's them doing it, not staff, so that we don't mix up and stamp something as preliminary that really should have stayed conceptual because they've got something new for preliminary, and somehow we got confused and didn't get it. So that's the reasoning behind having everything. And because of some of the discussions we've had recently, but staff has struggled with this quite a bit all along. The preliminary architectural plan shall include elevations for all buildings and color renderings of the design concept or intent.
Scarlett, where are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Page 2, line 6. This is in the preliminary plat now. And then one of the things that I've added, most of this is kind of in there already. I just am really detailing a little bit, but I did add a project data sheet listing the proposed exterior materials and the front facade percentages of the materials. Because I think we had been relying a little bit on color renderings and looking at the way those renderings were done and not getting actual percentages of how much of what product is really being used on the front. And we need to have that. If we're going to require that in the ordinance, we need to have the developers early on let us know that that's what they're doing. And if we wait till the final design to finally find out, and then they should have had like 20% hardy board, but really they've only been showing us 15% all along. Then they get frustrated because they put all that time and money into all that design and all those renderings and everything, and they didn't meet, and we didn't catch it at the preliminary plat stage. So we want to be very clear that, and we want the developer to know that they're meeting the ordinance or not as early on as we can. Then we also added that the preliminary plat, or excuse me, the preliminary parking plan shall show parking layout detailing residential parking, visitor parking, covered parking, bicycle parking, electrical vehicle charging stations, and include a data sheet demonstrating that the plan meets or exceeds the parking requirements per housing type. I feel like that's important because sometimes when we're trying to identify where the visitor parking is, it really is non-existent by the time you start going around, and there's no clear place for where visitors are going to park. They might have an extra stall on this row, an extra stall on that row, but a lot of times it's not clearly identified, and so it's really hard to make sure that we can tell that they've got the total number of parking places, but we really can't tell if they've got the split right between occupant and visitor parking and those type of things. And then a little further down on line 24, again, that's just saying that all final plats shall be clearly marked as a final plan and shall be stamped with the appropriate professional stamp and signed by the professional.
Scarlett, what I can see you're trying to do here is when they come in with the preliminary, we say, this is what you got wrong and this is what you need to do and everything. So when they go to the final, they don't have to do anything more with it. It just comes in as is. We've told them everything that has to be done in the preliminary.
Well, that's pretty much the goal. Yeah, that's the goal. And then if we get down, then we aren't suggesting any changes until we get down to page 5 on the minimum landscaped area.
Before we go to landscape, can we go back to that one you just?
Sure.
Final plan, where shall be stamped with the appropriate professional stamp. Are we requiring then that the professional engineer of whatever type assures us? Does that assure the city that the statutes have been met, that things have been met?
He's saying that what he's drawn on there, he's willing to stand behind because he's signed that he's
So
going to
now
stand
you're going
behind
to get your 20% that you wanted all along, even though nobody has calculated it yet, but we just think it's close. That you're going to get that from that professional.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And it gives the city a level of comfort that person that's because if the plan can be stamped, but if the plan's not signed, it's kind of like a contract that has Scarlet Bankhead agrees to do this, but if Scarlet Bankhead doesn't sign on there anywhere that I really agreed to do it, did I really agree to do it? And that's kind of, he might have his stamp on there to say, I'm the person that drew this, but when he signs it, he's saying, I'm the person that drew this and I stand behind this. So that's why we want the signature on the stamp as well, or she.
Okay.
Any more on those parts? Okay. So then if we go on down to page 5, this is where we get into some of the landscaping standards and open space. Our current, and this is one of the things that I've heard from council members, from public in general. They just feel like that the multifamily areas are too crunched. There's not enough green space. There's not anywhere for kids to play. And that might be the case. So we're looking at saying, okay, let's address children's play areas and let's address the open space. And I will tell you, the first time I did this, as I was going through, I had that the applicant would provide the children's play area at a minimum of 800 square feet per 10 units, plus an additional 10 square feet per unit above 10 units. So, so if they have 90 units, they're going to give us 800 square feet for the first 10, and then they're going to give us another 10 square feet, another,
Yeah, those,
For the rest of them.
yeah.
so you have 810.
Mm-hmm.
I
No,
don't think your
no.
language says that, though.
It doesn't?
Yeah. And, you know, the way I read it, it says the applicant shall provide children's play area at a minimum of 800 square feet per 10 units,
Oh,
plus an additional. And I think what you meant to say is 800 square feet per the first 10 units.
yeah, it should say first. Sorry, good catch. And then I had that as the applicant shall provide an open space equal to or greater than 10% of the overall project area. And this is one time when I've been looking through a lot of stuff when it came to open space. It was pretty consistent that people said the overall project area. And I just had it that was in addition to the children's play area. So you get 10% plus you get another 800 plus square feet for children's play area. After Kathleen and I talked about it, we came back with the suggestion that the children's play area can be included in the open space percentage. So that 800 square feet of children's play area could be part of the 10%.
Right.
So that was the goal, to get it to read like that. So hopefully that's the way that reads.
So we just define any multifamily unit development as families with kids.
Well, yeah, because it seems like that even in multi-family units or in areas that have like an active senior community, it seems like they have grandkids that come and visit and don't necessarily live there, but it does seem like there's a lot of times that those amenities are still being used.
Cobblestone didn't require that, did they?
No, they did not. Yeah, this is new. This children's play area is brand new. This to anything in Providence. We don't.
But my observation is that they probably need that over there for the number of kids that go and visit their.
Yeah, little
Grandparents.
jam
They have
door.
a swimming pool and a clubhouse, but nothing else.
Right.
Do they even have green space over there? I mean, it's,
You see, I don't know,
I don't get that place over there.
They have little tiny front lawns, and I don't know
Yeah.
what they've got in the back.
Lots of landscaping, but not a lot of land to landscape on. Anyway,
it's nice.
One of the things that they did to meet whatever requirement we had in place at the time, I believe they came in under the PUD ordinance, but I can't remember for sure. I'd have to go look at that. But where they have the creek, Spring Creek that runs through there, and then some of the wetland area in that area was included in their open space area. So that meant they didn't have to have as much behind each unit or surrounding each unit, because they had so much in that area that they could not utilize for anything else, but to have it be nice and open. There's a couple of places in here where, like on page 8, am I skipping? Oh,
Yeah,
no,
you
I skipped, sorry. Page 7, we talk about the bicycle parking. And this is just one space per 4 units. or 10% of the required off-street parking spaces, whichever is greater. So, and I took that out of the Seattle, the northeast area or northwest area. And so if you feel like that's overkill, I'm certainly open to suggestions, but that's where I got it to start with.
I'd leave it up to the public comment, see what they say, what they
Yeah.
review. I like it.
The bicycle parking part.
Is that enough? 1 per 4? Or should it be 2 per unit? I mean, if we really want to encourage foot traffic and bicycle traffic. And then we don't want to have 100 next to each other either, right? We want to have them broken up.
Well, I think when we have public comment, we probably ought to ask those questions. Point that out and say, is that enough? Because we have that question. I'd rather hear from the
And
citizens.
I don't know, Brian. I don't know the answer.
And if they have garages underneath, does that change the bicycle requirement? Because they would have a place to put their bicycles. I don't know.
We need a roof over it, we need it insulated, we need a large heater and air conditioner. Just for the bicycle. Of course, doors and windows on both sides. Smiley faces.
And then your visitors that come on bicycles, you have to have a place for them.
Sure.
Kathleen, it says per 4 units, if the units do not have private garage or private storage space for bike storage. So if the units are providing private garages or private storage space, they don't have to provide additional.
Zero?
Well, they have to provide 10% of the off-street parking, no matter what. But if they, if you added up the units and the units was going to be more than the 10% off-street parking, they wouldn't have to provide that extra if they're providing a garage or space per unit to lock their bikes up. Because we're figuring, well, as long as you're providing for bicycles, that's the main thing. If you don't have a garage to put them in, you've got to provide for a parking area for them. But we can certainly change that. Oh, shit. Pushed the wrong button.
That's the wrong thing. Okay. Any questions on that part from anyone?
No.
Further discussion?
I had to buy a new bike yesterday, Saturday.
So
Took
bikes
all
are
day,
on your
it's not a
mind.
good time to buy a bicycle.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Inventory's way down.
I would bet.
It's the COVID market.
Then on page 8, we have that the final development of each phase shall be reviewed and approved by the Providence. And we had city council for some reason, and it should be the planning commission because you're the people that are supposed to be approving the multifamily design. And then we have the
Okay, so
part
where
of
is, I'm sorry, where is that piece?
page 8,
Okay,
line 6.
I have got a different, I have a different printout.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah, that one's the one that was.
That wasn't correct. Okay.
Page 8, number 5.
That's electric
That's what she's
vehicles.
talking about. That's where page 8 is, so they see what she's talking about.
And then we do talk about the electric vehicle charging stations, just like we did in the mixed use. So it's
So we're last time I heard, which was just a couple weeks ago, we're at 2.5% of the population, or 2.5% of the cars on the road today are electric vehicles. And we want to encourage more electric vehicles? Or do we
Joe
want to?
Biden wants 100% electric.
Or do we want to encourage hydrogen, or do we want to encourage more bicycles and get away with do away with electric vehicle? I've seen firsthand a number of times the electrical code gets in the way of development. And this would be one more thing. And I'm not too happy about requiring more electrical infrastructure inside of each individual building. You can hire an electrician and have it done later, but that's just my opinion.
We're talking about outside electrical vehicle.
Yep.
Electrical vehicle ready, item number 3. F3. Applicants are required to construct private garages and duplexes that are electric vehicle ready. There's a
So we're talking about it inside
it's got to have electrical
inside of the
roughed
garage.
in the garage. Yeah.
Okay.
But for instance, there's in one of the counties in southern Idaho, they require a water softener space and plumbing to be installed in every house. They don't have to have the water softener in there, but when you go to build something, it gets to be a pain in the neck. Every time you turn around, it's like, you gotta have this and you gotta have that. It's like, I don't want a water softener by choice, or I'm building this myself. I'll put the water softener in wherever and how much ever space I want to use. So I just need to see us put
So what you're saying is requirements build in additional
costs.
Yep.
They've got the latest electrical ordinance I heard was any of these outlets on the wall here are only good for 5 years. That they need to be replaced every 5 years. That's code today because they're afraid that the plug will wear out and it'll start to droop a little bit, and then the contacts will be very slim, and so it'll overheat and it'll cause a fire. That's code today, and that's no fun. I mean, I don't know. It's never been a problem in my house. Never been a problem anywhere I've seen. So anyway, those are the kind of things I hate to see.
I've had one that they just described.
Yeah. So the solution is to go through your whole house. I mean, it's an expensive deal. Go through the whole house and put them all in.
What, from a practical point, wouldn't just having a breaker box with an empty breaker and a line that would carry the 50 amps down to the garage without?
Well, the 50 amp breaker is going to be the biggest one in the house, and so that's going to be expensive. And then the wire on it is going to be significant size, and then the labor to put it all in. So at least half of the cost is going to be the rough end, and the other half will be the fixture itself when somebody finally mounts it up. So I just hate to see us keep putting these restrictions when
You may or may not need it.
that's right. And I'm guessing, and right now, 2% of the people need it. That's nice, but that doesn't mean the rest of the 98% should have to toe the line.
Okay, that can be part of public comment. Right?
I'm open to changes however you guys would like me to, so.
I appreciate that you brought it to our attention. I happen to feel the same way Brian does.
Too many requirements
That for
for a small
2%
percentage.
for 2% of the people, why would we cause 98% of 100% of the people to incur the cost for it?
You can put a rope in so you can pull the line later, right? Okay, valid points. I think again,
So are you proposing to strike line 29 and 30, or are you looking for broader? Is it the garages that every one of them? So should those be struck?
Well, I think we ought to have a public discussion. And I think those are the points that are going to come up during public discussion. I think that's one of them. At least I'll bring it up.
Now that's only for the private garages for duplexes and triplexes.
Private garage period, though, isn't it? What about the apartments that we've approved recently
it says
to be built?
applicants are required to construct private garages for duplicates and triplexes that are electric vehicle ready.
In short, that can be,
So why not fourplexes?
I don't know.
Well, it should be for
Like I said, I
everybody.
was just
It
private,
should be
private
for
homes.
everybody or for nobody.
Maybe we hadn't ought to be in that business.
they're saying you're having a charging station for three residences, and maybe one will use it, maybe won't.
Well, only 2%, maybe.
Yeah,
And if they get free electricity at work, they won't use the ones at home. So there's splitting your 2% down to 1%. I think it needs to come up, I think we need to strike the duplexes and triplexes. Anything on the multifamily should
So any building,
not.
in any,
In this ordinance, it's multifamily ordinance, right?
right,
So any multifamily unit should not have to do that, that they shouldn't have to do an electric vehicle ready.
So you're okay with the general parking area having electric vehicle charging stations, just not the garages
yeah.
requirements? Okay.
Those would pay for themselves. Those would pay for themselves, wouldn't they, the general ones? I mean, who would pay for the electricity that goes through those if it was a public, if it was in the guest parking area? And I'm starting to see those in Salt Lake recently.
either the HOA or you put your credit card in.
Depends how they choose to
Okay.
do it, so, okay.
Okay, so this would be a discussion item when it comes up for public comment.
Or do you want me to take that garage part out right now?
If you're all opposed, then
I'd take it out.
Okay. That's kind of how I feel. If you really don't want to see the garage thing in there, we'll take it out. If somebody mentions it during public comments and makes a argument for something we're having, end it back in.
Yeah, somebody says we wanna have it in the garage, and well, okay.
Contractor will love to add it to their bill when they order the house.
And Joe, you'll have to help me on this wording change that I have down here on the, before I do that, no, it is now. So on page 10, on line 22, it says, in the event of an approved preliminary or final site plan, in the event an approved preliminary or final site plan requires revision by the developer, the plan and its revision, and it did say shall be approved by the city council upon recommendation of the planning commission, but I know where they came from. That's the way our ordinance, all of our land use ordinances used to read, and this is one where we didn't catch the approved by the council with recommendation of the planning commission. But the way I read that meant that the city council was going to have to approve it. I don't know that a revision should have to be approved. I think it should give you the option that you may approve it, but I just want to make sure I was reading that right, Joe, and not too literally. So how do you read that? Should it stay shall?
Shall implies you will.
Well,
It's not a maybe.
yeah, but they're not saying it in the sense that it shall go before the planning commission, is what you're trying to accomplish, isn't it?
Yeah, we're trying to say those revisions, staff can't do revisions. It has to go back to the planning commission for approval.
Right,
You can say revision will need to be approved by the planning commission,
Okay.
something to that effect.
I just didn't want to put the idea out there that a revision would be approved. Period.
Yeah.
That was my only concern.
I'd strike both shall and may, and just say that its revision will be will be submitted for approval to the planning commission.
Okay,
Something to that effect.
okay. And this is something that we've kind of started doing it. We've had it in our ordinances for a long time, but with the developments that we've got coming, we can really see a positive reason for having the preliminary plans. Once you could, with the way most things are, preliminary plans are much more detailed than an actual final plat for recording. Now, not necessarily an engineered stamped landscape plan, but if you're getting ready to record something, a preliminary plan has much more detail than the final plat does. So it's important if somebody questions as they're going through phasing or anything like that, it's important to make sure we have the right preliminary plan on file that was approved. And the best way to know that that preliminary plan was approved is to have them do a preliminary plan that includes all of the conditions that you established as part of your approval process for the preliminary plan. The way we've kind of let them do it is as long as they make those changes and they work them into the final plat and those changes are taken care of, all is good and well. But that's not really the best method. The better method would be to have them prepare a preliminary plan once you approve it. Once they meet the conditions that you established with it, prepare that plan, have that plan signed, and then it doesn't have to be recorded anywhere, but we do have a signed copy by the Planning Commission chair, or the Land Use Authority, which would be the Planning Commission, the owner, the applicant, and the Land Use Authority.
What about the engineer?
We could put the city engineer if you wanted to.
Complicate the process.
So,
But those are the people that look at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that the preliminary needs to go through, if it's not right, that it needs to go back again and again and again until we have a preliminary plan in-house, in hand, that's ready to sign off.
Well, you don't have to necessarily see it come back again and again and again. Like if you had conditions that said, change this note, add this note, change that note. Then when they brought it back in, the staff could look at that and say, yes, they changed this note, they added that note, and they changed that note.
But they forgot this
So
one.
now it's ready to sign.
But they forgot this one, so they're gonna come back to staff.
Yes,
And so show that this is what they
Right.
asked for, this is what we've done, and move on.
unless you feel like the changes are so significant that you want to see them, which is fine, and then you tell them, we're going to continue this.
But who's going to judge that?
If you
That
ask,
is so significant. I mean, how do we
You.
even know?
you as the planning commission are going to say that as part of your motion on your conditions, that you feel like
Are there
you
any
need to see that.
changes to the preliminary plan?
You feel,
Significant changes?
no, you would decide as part of your conditions if you felt like you wanted to see, and then it might be 10 simple things, but you're thinking, geez, I want to see this plan again. I don't want to have staff make sure that all those 10 things are done. I want you to come back.
But what's wrong with asking what staff feels about this plan? Is it complete? I mean, is that too much to ask?
No.
You feel comfortable that the conditions that we've talked about have all been met and the plan that's currently on file and that they were asking to approve? So we could ask staff's opinion.
You can do it either way. That's totally up to you at the time you make your motion as to whether to approve or whether to continue a preliminary plat. And then staff will follow those directions. And if you put it on staff, then staff will make sure that the developer's done their job. But it would still be the land use chair or someone from the land use authority that would sign, and the owner, and we can add the city engineer. That's a good idea, and the applicant. The reason why the owner and the applicant are on there is because sometimes the owner and the applicant are two different people, and sometimes the contract is based on the final outcome. And so a preliminary plat, you don't have a final outcome, and so you still need to have that owner involved, even if there's an applicant that's going through the process.
I just hate to hold people hostage again to come to another meeting, unless it's a total redesign.
Well, that's why I say, and it would be up to you to decide that as you were approving.
On a project by project basis.
Yes.
And it'd be the exception to do that unless there were so many that you just said, look, I really want to see this again. That's the way I'm hearing it.
Yeah, we try not to bring in if there's that many exceptions, but, I mean, if there's that many conditions, but every once in a while, we'll run up against a time frame and a developer will just be insistent that it come before you, and so once in a while you do see more conditions than we like to press forward. But particularly in some of this where you are so involved in the approval process, making sure that the design element is what you want, and because some of this does, like in the mixed use, some of this, that's a lot the planning commission has say into whether they like that design or not. And so you see some of that earlier than you would in a traditional subdivision, because in a traditional subdivision, if they meet the ordinance, it doesn't matter whether we like the design. If they're meeting the ordinance, they get to move forward. But you get a little bit of say in these multifamily, the mixed use areas. And so you may see some that do have what you may consider significant conditions that you normally wouldn't see in a traditional subdivision. So you would do it on a case-by-case basis, like Joe says.
Just a couple of thoughts with that, if I might. One, with the signature, having the engineer is going to sign the construction drawings. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, they take care of their signature at that stage.
The city engineer?
The city engineer signs it at that point. So I think that at that point, unless you need him there, I would say let him sign the construction drawings as already required. This is the plat, and the plat's the applicant and the land use that approved it. But
as long as his signature's on there, it doesn't matter when.
Well, it'll be different documents, but they'll,
right.
I mean, we'll be more detail how to construct it. That's what he wants. That's what we want to make sure that the engineers reviewed how it's constructed. Right. So, but for an example on staff, if you say, strike these three words from the plan, it's easy for us. It shouldn't have to come back. We can see, yep, strike those three. Yeah. If you say we want to see full new facade drawings because we don't like these and those don't match, and unless you bring us the right ones, we don't want to approve it.
So during that process is when we would say that we want to see it again.
Right, mm-hmm. Right.
Otherwise, it can just fly through.
So when you see those conditions that are presented, you can say, all those conditions can be reviewed. Those are easy ones for staff to review. That yep, that's done. But if you say some of those conditions, you say, we want to make sure that matches exactly what we want, then ask for it to come back. Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So we can do the wording to reflect that
in your motions for as each one comes up.
Okay.
And then it again talks about the infrastructure improvements, because we did have the development just next door to us to the north is a single owner development, and so they didn't go through the subdivision process, and so there wasn't anything tying that to our minimum improvement rules. And the minimum improvement rules only apply, the way the subdivision process is, it applies to the public infrastructure. Well, if you get a fairly big private infrastructure, you got to be able to apply some of the fire code and the health safety rules to the private improvements in order to make it a safe place for people to work until people can move in there and live. And so that's part of the reason for the change is just so that we can make sure that our construction sites are safe sites while they're being built, and that there's some idea that the improvements that are going in there are going to work. So that's the reason. And then again, we have the improvement completion assurance and the improvement warranty. some of this won't apply to the private stuff, some of it will only apply to the public infrastructure. It'll just depend on the development and how, whether they're, that's just on the surety. That doesn't mean that we can't require them to have a safe work site as part of minimum improvements, but the bonding portion is different for the private improvements than it is for the public improvements.
You know, can I just make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have that on the copy that I'm looking at on mine, but I'm going back to the mixed use one. That I'm sure the language is very similar. And as I was reading it, the differentiation between the improvement warranty and the improvement completion assurance really didn't come out in the paragraph. And paragraph C is what I understand to be your improvement warranty bond.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you ought to put a heading in there
Okay.
to make it clear that that's the improvement warranty as
Okay.
opposed to the one above it, which is the improvement completion assurance.
Okay. I can do that. And I can do that on this one too, because you're right, they're really similar. So those are the reasons for the additional changes. We just really want in the multifamily where we're putting design standards in place, we just really want to make sure that what you approve or what you think you approve is what actually is ultimately going to be built. And the best way we can do that is with good documentation and good applications coming in from the development community.
So we're not guessing what the final ones are,
Right. So we're on the same page through the whole process.
and everybody signs off, and then we know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what we inspect to, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Do we want to go over more of the EV and solar panel issues? I think we might have skipped a bunch of that.
We can certainly go back to that.
I'm concerned about the solar energy systems. They're asking that the solar energy on be mounted flush to the roof plane. We're going to get giggles and laughs out of that one when we tell the public, or give the public that one. They don't install that way. Tesla keeps trying, but we have yet to see anybody do that type of solar design successfully.
So take the flush to the roof.
Flush
line.
mounted out, or yeah, flush mounted out.
That's on the solar energy.
Yeah, the
one.
number 6 under F. I guess page 9, line 39.
Okay.
And then lots of stipulations here under standards. Now we want to add signs to electric vehicle charging stations.
You can take as much out as you'd like. I just,
Cord management, I mean, we're talking some real details here. Snow removal.
Do we need to be that detailed? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Too much detail?
Yep, the maintenance doesn't make any sense at all. If these are for profit, the owners are going to take care of them. They're going to do the maintenance on
So
them.
we don't need to put that in our code?
No. Snow removal is a given. It's parking, and it should be treated like any other parking in regards to snow removal. Installing bollards to protect the EV charging station. Seems reasonable, but if I was building one, I'd put a lot of bollards in.
But do we need to micromanage that?
Yeah. And then a retraction device on cord management. No, I don't think so. Anybody disagree? I don't think we're getting too detailed into if this is a for-profit venture for somebody, then let them.
So do you want us to just stop at, line 6, where it says, well, it starts at line 1 on page 9. Location, electric vehicle charging stations shall not obstruct building access, right-of-way, sidewalks or pathways, parking space dimensions, or site distance triangle, and then just stop,
Leave it at
from
that.
there on.
I'm not reading the same one you are. I'm on the May 11th.
This,
May 11th version.
I crossed out what you said to delete. So there's a list of things.
But which one is this?
Yeah, mine's 4 days newer than this one. So, yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I think you need to tell the public that we trust them.
On what tissue to use.
And then who's gonna manage all of that too? That's an issue.
And if you put it in the ordinance, that puts it on the city to manage it.
Right. And we're gonna take out the electric vehicle ready piece of that. So the developer, if they think it's gonna sell, they'll put it in. Right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and that the products are available today. And then, if they're garages, then why would they want to have EV stations besides that? Is that for their visitors? I mean, if they've got a garage that's EV, why would we want them to have an EV outside in the parking lot?
For visitors,
For visitors? Okay.
I guess.
Now, do we,
Well, it could be that they have a mix of types of homes. So a lot of times apartments don't have garages with them,
Well, I can understand
and
that.
townhomes do. So it could be that you would have a mix of units that do have garages and units that would have open parking or more
Just cover
centralized
parking as
parking.
opposed to. Well, I agree that let's not get into too much detail because then we've got to manage all that
Yep.
as a city.
We'll let
do we want to start to make the revisions before we go to,
Yes,
before we go to
public hearing, yes.
Okay.
So then that brings us back to the question on landscaping and on parking spaces and things like that. Do you want me to take the information that's in the multifamily standards and move that into the mixed use and say for single family attached and multifamily buildings and have that right in the mixed use development instead of referring them to this? And then the same thing with the commercial site plan standards, take them and put them into the mixed use ordinance?
I think if we've got it written one place and we can refer to it, why do we have to put it in every single one, I guess? Unless you find that that's more effective when working with the developers.
No, that was just our topic of discussion, and that's why we came to this point, was because Joe was asking about landscaping requirements
Right.
for the mixed use. And so now that we've kind of gone through this,
And have a standardized
my question is, do you want to do the way it is right now and just refer mixed use people to the commercial code and to the multifamily and single family attached code? Or do you want to have specific standards to the mixed use?
My preference would be to refer it to the same standard.
Okay.
And then if it's not working, let us know.
Okay.
As a software engineer, that's first line, first rule. You don't you don't write things in multiple locations.
Okay.
Then it's multiple maintenances, but that's
Right. You refer them to one spot.
always. If you don't, then you have to hire somebody like me, and we just chase it around, and we charge a lot of money, and okay, it's fine with me.
Okay, and that's what we'll keep it the way we are. We'll keep the mixed use at kind of a minimal and refer them to either the commercial site plan or the multifamily design standards for the details on it.
Yeah, I like that, because then it's consistent and we don't have to change multiple things.
Okay. And I'll go through and make those changes on the electrical vehicles, parking places. I'll make the change on the 800 square feet for the first 10 units. So, and then the other changes that we've discussed.
So do we want to see this again before it goes to public?
This one we should see again before it goes to public.
So both of them we're going to see again.
I wouldn't want to, but I'll defer to what
I don't
you all want.
We're gonna see it afterwards, aren't we?
Oh, yes.
Well, we're going to see it during the meeting.
Right, but
And
I'm
we'll
just
get a
saying
copy
that
of it to look at it.
we can have the same discussion after we have the input,
Right.
and then we can, and hopefully we're close enough, we can come to a complete statute revision.
So we're going to public comment for the next round.
Probably good.
Public hearing. Okay, let's do that.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thanks, Scarlett. That was a ton of work.
Thanks.
Good job. See, we want Scarlett doing that kind of stuff, not repeating stuff everywhere. Okay, the last item on our agenda is to talk about training requirements. And the Utah Code for Planning Commission says that we need 1 hour of annual training in general powers and duties, 3 hours of annual training in land use, which could include any of the things that are in your packet. Appeals and variances, conditional use permits, extractions, impact fees, vested rights, subdivision regulation and improvements, improvement guarantees, land use referenda, property rights, real estate procedures and financing, zoning, including use-based and form-based, and drafting ordinances and code that comply with statute. A newly appointed planning commission member may not participate in public meetings as an appointed member until they complete the training described in 6B 1 or 6B and I. So the very first one is 1 hour of annual training on general powers and duties, and that is available online. And you can access that. And it's under Utah, is it under the government or Utah cities and towns?
The land use 101.
Yeah.
The land use 101 would be found under the Utah League of Cities and Towns. They've incorporated the Land Use Academy. What is that, Lua?
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, they've incorporated that. They sent out an email recently, and I never know whose email they have on their list or not. I will forward that to you all. It introduced their new website. It introduced the Utah League of Cities and Towns has incorporated the training standards. And they've got a website that you can go to on that and see.
And does it keep track of the hours?
No, you have to keep track of your own hours. Well, I shouldn't say that. I didn't see on there, but then I didn't go in and take any of the classes. So I don't know if when you get through the course, if it just lets you print out a certificate of completion, or if it actually records that you did it. I didn't get to that point to see that. But there are the courses that you do. There's a plethora of courses that's pretty good. So.
Okay. So is it Utah League of Cities and Towns and then LUA?
Yes.
Or is it lua.gov?
luau.utah.gov, luau.utah.gov/training opportunities. Land Use Academy of Utah.
But that's not the same as Utah League of Cities and Towns.
They put it on, but it is a different.
But you can get to it through their
You
website.
can get
Get the,
to it both places, yes.
Okay.
You can find a link, but going directly to it is the easiest.
Okay.
So there's a minimum requirement of 1 hour of training, of formal training,
Right.
before a newbie can be involved with the public.
And then 3 additional hours on the specific.
Each year. Yeah.
So 4 hours total. But if
First
you
year.
attend 12 meetings in a calendar year, you get credit for 1 hour.
Okay.
So
And we had, what was it, 2 hours of training last time. So we need to make up a spreadsheet for everybody and make sure that that we're keeping track so that we meet the ordinance.
I was gonna, I was not aware that they limited it to where you could get this training from the Division of Real Estate, the Utah League of Cities and Towns, or a list of training courses selected by the town. I've gotten back 4 ombudsman's opinions on projects that I'm working on with regards to land use matters. And the last one I got was really a blueprint for what planning commissions need to do in terms of what your powers are. And as you can affirm, our discretion is really limited once the ordinance is there. If it meets the ordinance, we're supposed to approve it.
Right.
But so I don't know if you guys want to use some training material for us. Those are really good sources.
I would love to see them.
I wonder, on the CPA side, if you present, and I don't know whether this works, so I'd have to look it up, but if you present training, you get a percentage of that hour. So if you prepared the training and presented that training to your peers, that they would get the hours they attended, but you would get, I think it's 1.5 for CPA. I don't know what it is for attorneys, but anyway.
I won't get anything as an attorney.
Right. Not on this one, but
Yeah.
Anyway, it might be one that, I think that'd be a great training to
It would
give.
be. That would be very advantageous, I would think, for us. Make us better at our job.
They actually have an index of the opinions.
They'll come up to your place and do training on site, ombudsman.
Yeah, if you told them you wanted it specifically on topics, they'd cover the couple of topics really quick.
Let's set it up. Let's do it.
You guys want to call the ombudsman's office and just basically see if they can come up sometime and
Present that to us.
And the topics I'd like to hear would be on planning commission, and I'm not too interested in, I don't even know what zoning use-based and form-based is. So when they use that in the thing.
Headaches.
Yeah,
That's when we look to Scarlett and say, Scarlett, what is that?
This thing is on June 3rd.
There's a training on June 3rd.
Right. Is the city pay for that?
Yeah, we pay for training, but I don't know the June 3rd one.
There's
particularly.
it's
At the 101 or,
Cache County. Cache County is putting on a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I do read your emails.
Is it that mid-year summit?
Yes.
That's $15, and yes, we would reimburse you for that if you go on and register.
Or do we tell you and you'll register us, or do you want us to register? How do you want to do that?
you can tell me and I can register, or you can, if you don't know right now and I go on and register and you decide later you want to go, you can register and we can reimburse you. We can do it either way. Whatever's easy for you.
Put me on the list, if you'll register me, that would be great. So it's from like 8 in the morning till 1:30 or something.
Mm-hmm. And it includes lunch.
Me too, artist.
Scarlett,
Scarlett.
Okay, got you.
she knew what you were talking about. She could read between the lines. Okay, so that's it for our agenda.
I move to close this meeting.
Wait. Topics, do we have like anything else? Say that. Do we have anything else that we wanted to discuss?
Do we have anything else? And
Yeah,
when is our
I
next meeting?
I wanted to just share with you a solution that the city of Sacramento came up with.
Okay.
And you probably all heard about it, but Sacramento felt that they had an affordable housing issue and that they had to come up and address it somehow. And so their solution was to go and remove single-family traditional housing from their zoning. And in lieu of that, they put in multifamily, four-unit buildings could now be put into that same property. So they figured that a lot of the dilapidated homes in downtown Sacramento were going to be wiped away and replaced with brand new buildings, and then the nicer buildings would be cut up internally and placed into fourplexes. And that was how they solved affordable housing. And it didn't cost them any significant amount of money. It wasn't on the developer's back. It was all market driven. I don't know how that happens in California, but that anyway was a very creative solution.
And most of these dilapidated buildings were on stilts because the river would flood over and they had to have the houses up high enough for the river to flood in.
What about citizen feedback? Did they get any
I'm sure
blowback?
they did, but all I saw was the final, that they voted it in Sacramento now. It's got, stamped on their forehead, this is how we're gonna solve the problem of affordable housing. And yeah, they got feedback, I'm sure, a lot of it, but I don't know how much.
Well, there's no question that we'll need to do that. I was talking today to my daughters that are down in the Draper area, and they're talking about the ugly, ugly apartments that they're building in neighborhoods that are multi-million-dollar houses.
The zoning's good for it. The zoning's all correct for it, right?
Yeah.
It's been zoned so we can do it here if we want.
Right, they don't even have to ask permission. They
But
just.
then we get into the design standards and, then we get to be careful about the design standards where we don't dictate too much on the way they look or quality on what they're built.
There's no question it's a real balance. But lots of citizen feedback, lots of people not happy with it. But what do we do?
I think people see the multifamily developments here in our city and other cities, and they classify it in their mind as low-income housing.
Right.
And here in Providence, there
It is
isn't
not low
anything
income.
that's low income. I don't think we even have, Scarlett, anything that's moderate income housing, considering the price that multifamily is going for, condos and townhouses.
I would agree with you, Mayor, with one caveat, and that is we've got quite a few homes in town that are occupied. Usually it's by males, but multiple families are living there. You can tell because when you drive down the street, they've got 6 cars parked, in the right of way, the city's right of way, in front of their homes, and that to them is affordable housing. They're splitting the bill 6 ways, and I know it's against the law or whatever, but it's happened. It's been going on for a long time here in the city, and Logan has the same problem. I have a friend who in town that was a compliance officer over there, and he caught my son one day doing it. And
In Logan.
In Logan, right? And that was around the student housing issues.
Well, it's an issue if people are doing that. Everybody has all American dream that they want to live in a single family home. They don't need lots and lots of property, but they,
Single family home? You just said all of our apartments are,
people have the American dream
I know,
in their mind. That it isn't what reality is,
but it's the way, it's the hope that drives us.
but it's the,
It's the hope.
Reality today is what they can afford.
yes,
And
true.
As you get older, your desires change.
Your reality changes, for sure. Okay. Rowan,
I move to close this meeting.
second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Rowan Cecil, motion. Brian Marble, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. Oh, our next meeting will be on the,
26.
At least the 9th, unless there's things to go on the agenda. I think we have some things maybe coming, I don't know. We
there are
haven't
a couple.
There are a couple that might, the one that I thought was going to, after I got through with its review today,
It's not gonna come.
I don't think so.
Okay. So it may be on the 26th
Aye.
or